Hey friends, Jeffy G here. This is part 2 in my series about sampling, beats, and loops. If you didn't see part 1, there's a link in the description down below. And it is all done in the studio, whereas part 2 is all going to be outside the studio, mobile sampling, and really focusing on iOS devices. In fact, if you're new to sampling and you're just getting started and you have an iPhone, you have everything that you need. So the first part of this video is going to be all about how to use that iPhone or iPad to manage samples, to collect samples, create your own samples, and turn them into songs. I get all excited about the fun you can have with an iPhone, and it's such an important part of music production these days. Not only just for sampling, but you can do full music production on an iOS device. Obviously with an iPad, you have a lot more real estate than you have with a small iPhone, but still, the capabilities are mind-boggling. One of the first things I'm going to cover is using GarageBand for sampling. But it's not the only option on your phone. You can do something as simple as using Voice Recorder, which does very high quality recording. It's got reasonable microphones in it, it's a good way to collect your data, and you can either bring it back to the studio or do your production and editing on your iPhone or iPad. I'm also going to cover things like BeatMaker 3, Cubasis, which are full DAW-capable applications that you can run on iOS. And I'm going to touch on Koala Sampler, which for a very small price is an amazing little sampler that gives you the ability to create patterns and entire songs. This is one of the more exciting parts, I think, of music production these days, and I think you'll enjoy it. Just going to open GarageBand. I'm going to open a new song. Before I do that, it's important to make sure you have all the content, which would include all the loops, samples, and beats that Apple provides as Apple Loops. By clicking on sound packs, you get to view all of the sound packs that Apple delivers for free. They're quite extensive, and you can see by looking at them that I've downloaded most of them. But let's just click on one anyway. And when you select a sound library or sound pack to download, it tells you what it contains. In this case, there's over 30 drummer loops, there's drum kits and individual drummers, and you can hear what it sounds like by clicking on the preview. The theory there is that you would listen to the preview before you download it. And anything that hasn't been downloaded will show up as new. So you can see modular rhythms. If I click on that, I have not downloaded that yet. It includes more than 200 Apple loops and 12 drum kits. I can preview it. The preview just gives you some idea of what those loops are going to sound like. Now, back in GarageBand, I'm opening up a new blank live loops session. Whenever you open a song in GarageBand, it's kind of counterintuitive, but it calls it My Song. And then later you can go back and delete or rename each song. I'm just going to delete that one. And you'll see I have lots of songs available to me. One of the cool things about GarageBand is that if you have an iCloud account, and you likely do if you have an Apple ID, is that it stores your GarageBand projects on the cloud. So if I want to create a new one, I click on the plus sign at the top, and I have a choice of a tracks-oriented project or live loops. I'm just going to use live loops for the purpose of this demonstration. Click on Live Loops. Okay, and you can see this is a blank grid. I've got rows of cells here, but nothing in them. And just like in part 1 of this series, there's a loop icon on the right. It looks like a loop. Click on that, and you can browse through all of the loops that you've downloaded from Apple or files, which would be loops that you've imported from free sources, perhaps on the internet, or music from your iTunes library. I'm just going to stick with Apple loops because, as I've said before, they're highly adaptable to the tempo and pitch of the song that you're creating. If you click on the loop, you can preview the sounds. And you can scroll through all the sounds, or you can filter what you see by instrument. So if I choose, say, drum kits, I can listen to a drum kit. I think I'll take one of these shuffle kits. And by pressing on it and holding it, you can drag it into the live grid. Put that in the first cell. And now I'm going to look for a guitar. So I'm going to click on Instruments, Guitars, and Preview a Guitar. That'll work. And drag it into, if I listen to my grid so far, I've got the beginnings of a song. I think I'll add a bass part to that. Go back to the loop library, loop browser. I'll pick on an instrument, bass. That'll do. And you can see that as I do this, I can build a grid of as many rows and columns as I might like, and each one of those columns can be a scene, like an intro or a verse or a chorus. And of course, all the other features of GarageBand are available to you here. You can set the volume of each loop. You can add plugins like treble and bass, or echo and reverb. You can modify the EQ of a given sound. You've got multiple effects that you can play around with. It's amazingly powerful for something on your iPhone. I'm just going to walk through another scenario where you download a loop library. You see I've got Safari open, and I've done a search on the Music Radar website for free sample packs. And as I scroll down, there's a description of a bunch of these free loops, and you can download a particular kit. So I'm going to download the Dubstep Kit 2, which has samples at 145 BPM, which is beats per minute. It asks me if I want to download it. I say yes. Once it's downloaded, I'm just going to go look at it in my downloads folder of my iPhone using the Files app. Okay, open the Files app, click on Downloads, and there it is, Dubstep Kit 2. I click on that, and it's going to expand the zip file. See, it's populating the folder. And if I was to look into the folder, I'll see it's divided up into bass parts, beats, percussion, synths, and something called wob piano. Let's listen to the wob piano. That's interesting. And let's just grab some of the beats, see what they sound like. So I definitely have some samples that I've gotten for free. And this time in GarageBand, we're going to open up a empty new project, but it's going to be a tracks project, not a live loop project. So I'm going to click on plus, and you see instead of live loops, I've got tracks highlighted. I'm just going to create a blank audio track. I'm scrolling through the instruments. Whoops, there we go. And I'm gonna choose instrument. You could choose voice. It doesn't actually matter. I'm gonna display all of the tracks. It has a little guitar icon there, but that is just an audio track where you would have recorded guitar. But instead of recording guitar, I'm going to click on the loop browser, and I'm going to pull in one of those samples that I just downloaded by clicking on Files at the top. Instead of looking at the Apple loops, I'm looking at Files. I'm going to browse items. Oh, there's that wob piano. And there it is. So I can preview the sample I've downloaded. By holding it, I can drag it into the project I'm working on. Okay. So, turn off the metronome. You can see if I was serious about the metronome being in sync with that particular sample, I can go into the settings for the song overall and change that to 145. Now the metronome should be in sync. And it is. It is, okay. So what I've done now is imported a loop that I downloaded for free, and I'm going to use that drum beat in the creation of a song with multiple tracks. And I did that through the loop browser. And the other thing you can do is edit samples within GarageBand that you've either accumulated or downloaded for free. Clicking on the plus, and for this track, I'm going to use the sampler. You can see under keyboards, there's Smart Piano, Alchemy Synth, and Sampler. Click on Sampler. By default, when you load the sampler, it always loads this bark. But we don't want the sound of a dog barking. We want to change the sound. So if you click on the upside down arrow in the top left, you'll see it says bark. You click on bark, and you can choose a different sample to work with. So in my case, I'm going to import another sample. I'm going to import that wob piano. And to do that, I have to click on the little load. Now, looks like it loads it automatically to key C1. So if I play an E, plays the same sample but at different pitches. I've got no MIDI notes in there. I can record something for that track. And just back up to that first track where I had that drum beat. My GarageBand project has 8 bars, but this is only taking up 2 of them. Double click on that loop. You can see I can cut and paste it, delete it. I can also loop it, in which case it fills the entire song. Let's try bringing in another loop. I'm going to browse through that dubstep set of samples that I downloaded. Press and hold. Put that on a separate track. Double click, I can loop it. Let's see what else I can load. Browse items. Let's say maybe a synth. And something you'll notice is that as I'm dragging these into the track view of GarageBand on my iPhone, it brings in the sample, and these samples are varying length. Some of them are 2 bars, some of them are 4. This one is 4, and in each case I can double click on it and loop that sound. So you can get the sense that you can build a song either using live loops or the tracks view, all on your phone. Now, one more thing, we're looking at the sampler here in GarageBand on an iPhone. It has very limited real estate for you to actually see and edit the sample. But again, if you click on the upside down triangle in the top left and the current sample, it'll bring up the sample itself, and you get to see a view of what that sample looks like. You can see some of the options you have are to edit the sample. You can change the tuning of the sample. You can reverse the loop, okay? So it would play the sample backwards, or you can revert back to its original state. And you'll see that the VU meters on the left are picking up my voice as I speak. And that's because you could actually record your own sample right from here. I mean, if you're outside and you wanted to record a sound like a car passing by or, the noise in a restaurant, you could do it straight from your iPhone here. I'm just going to record my voice. Pew! Okay, it's kind of dumb, but it does make a sound. And I can use that sound. If I play a key, C3, it plays it back. You can see different pitches. You could actually edit that sound. Maybe take the harshness out of the beginning. Shorten the sample itself. So there you go. You've got examples where you can create your own samples as well as importing samples from a free source. All of these options, you can do it all on your phone. I spent a disproportionate amount of time talking about GarageBand for a couple of reasons. First, it's available on every iOS device, whether it's an iPhone or an iPad. It's even available for your Mac. Second, it's free, so if you're a beginner and you're just getting involved with sampling, GarageBand might be a good place to start. In this next section, I'm going to cover a lot of third-party apps that are great for sampling, and they run both on your iPhone or on an iPad. And in many cases, the real estate that's available on your iPad makes these apps a lot easier to use. I'll show you the differences and tell you what strengths they have. It's from a company called Amplify Music. They've got 2 or 3 apps for iOS that are free, and they're really quite excellent. The first one is Launchpad for iOS, and the second one I'm going to focus on is Blocs Wave. What's pretty cool about these 2 apps is that they're available both for your iPad and for your iPhone. They've managed to sort of shrink down all the capabilities onto the iPhone platform. So if you don't have an iPad, you're still good. Launchpad is more of a performance tool. Blocs Wave is more of a composition tool. They both use the same library of samples, loops, and beats, and you can import your own samples into Blocs Wave if you subscribe and get the advanced features. So there is a cost associated with that, but it's pretty neat. Okay, here's just a quick look at Launchpad. You can click on any cell or a group of cells. It's essentially a performance device that lets you bring in a sample pack and perform different samples in whatever order you see fit. It has volume controls, there are effects built in, and there are filters that you can apply to any of those sounds. And you have the option of opening up different packs of sounds. So here I can just open up, say, 80s hip hop. It'll pre-populate all the cells. And once again, you can just play it well. has all the basic things like a metronome where you can set the tempo, you can change the key, as all of these samples are typically in one key. You can save your projects and you can make recordings. You can share your recordings either as audio or video. Brings up the standard share box. If you click on your library, you can create an empty project and drag your own samples into that project. You can give it a name. And then through searching in your library, you can just drag, and in doing so, you can create your own grid. Blocs Wave is a little bit different, but still uses the same samples. And typically when you open up Blocs Wave, it's going to look like this. It's going to open the last project that you had open and give you this octagonal, that's a hexagonal environment from which to choose samples. If you want to start a new project, same thing, go to the library, click on plus. It'll give it a funny name, and it'll be a blank project. And in that blank project, you can load samples into these cells across the top. Blocs Wave is a little bit interesting in the sense that it has this discovery tool. As you click on the same group of sounds, drums, bass, melodic, or whatever, it'll cycle through a bunch of different samples until you find one that you like. Then you can go to the next cell. You can fill 8 of these sounds 6 times. You can organize all of your samples basically into scenes that you might use in Launchpad or export to another DAW. The sounds that you're seeing in this discovery are also browsable, and you can browse them either by the pack that they came in. So for example, here if I click on 70s Soul, I'll see all of the sounds organized by their type, bass, drums, melodic, FX, and I can essentially put one of those sounds into one of the cells. You can also edit samples here. There's some basic tools for modifying the EQ, for changing the pan, slice, and loop. Now the real question is, where did all these samples come from? Well, they give you a limited number of sounds for free when you download the app. But in order to access the full library of sounds in that browser capability, all of the potential packs, you have to have a subscription to Amplify. You can also have user samples that you've imported. So one of the big features of Blocs Wave is that you can import sounds from a third-party source. Browse your hard drive. Let's say in your downloads directory here on my iPad, I've got different loop libraries that I've downloaded. I can pick one, click on it. It will read the title and try to import it, determining the key, the tempo, and the number of beats. And if you agree, you can import that one, and it will add it to your user library. Just like Launchpad, you can change the key, and you can change the beats per minute. But most interesting within Blocs Wave is the fact that you can export all of the samples into another DAW. By clicking on the share option, you can export project files, and what it will create is a zip file with all of the individual samples. You can save that to your iCloud account, or you can share it via email, and then you can open up those same files in another DAW like GarageBand or BeatMaker 3. One of the best apps for doing sampling is this Koala Sampler. It's been out for a few years, and it really is quite amazing what you can do. What's cool about it is that the layout is very simple, so it's easy to learn. Down at the bottom here, you essentially have spots to capture a sample, and you can record those samples from the mic or you can import them. So for example, if you hold the button and say a word, bing, bing, it records that sample and you can use that melodically in your composition. So there's this sample mode where you can capture up to 64 different samples in the A, B, C, D, and E slots. You can just see those down the bottom here. Okay. After you've captured all the samples that you want, you can sequence them. And there's up to 32 slots to create 32 different patterns. And a pattern is really easy to record. You know, essentially, up here is an example. If you play it, different ways of capturing that. One is this keyboard method for a melodic sound like this one. If I turn on the keyboard, choose that patch, bing, 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 bing. So I can capture, say, a 4-bar pattern with that. And I just click record. Bing, 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 bing. Play it back. Bing, 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 bing. And then once you have all of your patterns sequenced, you perform them live to create the song. And from the menu here, you can record the song and execute the patterns in whatever order you want. And you can add all the effects that you see down below, like reverb and ring. And there's a couple different ways you can do these interactively. So I'm going to record a vocal sound into this sample cell. Oh, oh. Just gives you an idea of all the different sounds you can make. Then I'm going to go over to the sequencer and I'm going to create kind of a melodic tone here. Kind of silly, but it gives you an idea of what you can do. There's really no limitations here because you can pull in any sample you want. Like there's a good guitar sample, and if I want to include that in a sequence, I just go back to the sequencer, pick an empty cell, choose that one. And you can form these things into a song. It's pretty easy. On the main menu there's all kinds of settings. Some of the things that I really like about this thing, other than you can import and export all of your sounds, is that there's settings for using a third-party MIDI controller device, which I think is pretty cool. So you can hook up a Launchpad to this or any MIDI device. You just click on this MIDI mapping, choose the items that you want to map. It's pretty easy to create mapping for almost any MIDI device. And then last but not least, you can export these sounds. You can export the current sample, all the samples, the entire sequences. You got all these options for exporting. So for example, if you want to put these in another DAW like GarageBand or another iOS app, you can export the raw samples. It'll ask for a name, and the normal share options show up from iOS. I'm just going to save this to a file. And I've got a directory on my iCloud account called iOS Projects. I'll just save this. And now I can go open up those samples in GarageBand or another iOS music production app. It's pretty cool. Beyond the sampling specific apps, there are full DAW capabilities in certain applications like BeatMaker 3, GarageBand, Cubasis, and a few others. And I'm not going to give you a full tutorial on BeatMaker 3, but I will open a session just to give you an idea of what it looks like. So one of the things about BeatMaker 3 is it has this pads orientation. You pick a particular song or session, you load that session, and it's going to populate banks of samples in these grid patterns. Some of them are melodic, some of them are percussion. But essentially, each one is represented as a grid of samples, and you can edit those samples extensively in BeatMaker 3, which is far beyond the capabilities of, say, Koala Sampler or GarageBand, for that matter. These are just an example of all of the parameters you can use to modify a particular sample. Pick the sample, make your edits. It's just a lot of stuff that you can do. And the primary view of executing a song looks somewhat like what you're familiar with in a full DAW. Okay, so it's got the transport controls at the top, like play and stop. You get the idea. It's quite powerful. It has a mixer and something that GarageBand really doesn't have. And of course, you can add effects, audio effects, to any of these channels. And once you're finished with your composition, you can share it. For melodic sounds, you can pick the scale and chords you want to execute. If you want to limit your playing to just those notes that are in, say, the major blues scale. Now, if you create a new bank, you can pick your sounds from a variety of sources. You'll see these are a lot of the delivered sounds. You can filter what you're looking for by instrument. So I'm just looking for drums. It's pretty amazing. Another DAW-like iOS app is called Cubasis, and the makers of this are Steinberg, the same folks that bring you Cubase. And you'll notice right away it looks just like a regular DAW on a Mac or on a PC. It has a mixer. It has pads that you can program for playing. It has a media template down at the bottom where you can search for audio files, projects. You can see off to the left, it's got features for automation, adding MIDI effects, send effects, inserts, routing. You can do complex routing with this far beyond what GarageBand would typically be able to do. And there's an unlimited number of tracks here that you can scroll through. And you can zoom in and out. It's full piano roll for MIDI editing and sequencer that you're familiar with if you want to program drum beats. It can be pretty complex, and it takes, I would say, iOS music production to a level beyond what we started with just GarageBand. Hey, this video was lengthy. It covered everything from the most basic thing of, recording your voice or a sample with the Voice Memo feature in your phone, all the way to using a digital audio workstation like Cubasis or BeatMaker 3 on an iOS device. We covered a lot of different software applications for iOS. We started with something so basic as using the voice memo capability. I spent a fair bit of time going over GarageBand. Even though this isn't a GarageBand tutorial, I thought it was a good starting point because it works on your iPhone and it works on an iPad. We covered things like Koala Sampler, the Amplify, Launchpad, and Blocs Wave applications. I also did a little bit of a preview of what you can expect in BeatMaker 3 and Cubasis, which are more DAW-Like capabilities built into iOS. BeatMaker 3 and Cubasis, because of their DAW-Like capabilities, require the real estate that's available on an iPad. You really can't do everything that those apps offer on an iPhone. Whereas GarageBand, Apple's done really a remarkable job of building tremendous functionality into even the iPhone version. One of the consistent things you find in all of these software apps is the ability to create your own samples or to import samples from loop libraries and other sources that you can get for free off the internet. But they are just tools. The inspiration for making your own beats and creating your own compositions really has to come from you. And that's one of the things I'm going to tackle in part 3, is the process and the workflow of coming up with those original ideas. So in part 3, I'm going to focus on the process, the inspiration, the workflow that you go through using samples to create songs and beats. If you invested the time to learn about sampling in the studio in part 1 and now have a feel for how to use samples on an iOS device, then you've got the groundwork for doing something really incredible. I hope you'll stick around for part 3 and recommend this to other people. If you found it useful, click on the like button or leave me a comment. And if this kind of information is useful for setting up your own music production environment, click on the subscribe button because there's a lot more videos to come.